I want to talk to you about in-text citations for your paper and how it relates to your works cited page. You'll notice that I have a split screen here. I have an actual paper at the top of the screen, and in the bottom half of the screen I have a works cited page, and I will be toggling back and forth between the two to illustrate how those work together. I'm going to start with the paper. This particular paper is about how the Garcia girls lost their accents. The author, I will assume to be a female, so I'll be referring to the author as a her. We begin the paper with a quote from the source Miller. You'll notice that Miller is simply in parentheses. If we go to the works cited page, we'll find the source Miller in alphabetical order. In fact, it's by Susan Miller. The first word of the citation is Miller, and that is what we go ahead and put in as the in-text citation. We notice that this came from a web page, and there are no page numbers, therefore we only use the first word. And in general, we will be using the first word for our in-text citation as it comes from the works cited page. There'll be some exceptions, and I'll be talking about those in a few minutes. The next part of this introductory paragraph references the actual book itself, how the Garcia girls lost their accents, and there's a general kind of summary of the book, followed by, of course, at the end of that first paragraph, the thesis statement for this project. We move down to the second paragraph, and we notice that the author decided to introduce this with the words, according to Alvarez in her article, How the Alvarez Girl Found Her Magic, and goes on to talk about information from that article. Because the author used that particular introductory sentence, we don't need to put a citation at the end of the sentence. It is clear that it came from the article, from the works cited page that has that very title. And we find that right there in the works cited. Moving down the paper a little bit further, though, the author then switches over to another source, Miller. We would assume that beginning with this sentence, people who read were watched carefully because they were believed to be intellectuals. That information then came from Miller. Anything prior to that would assume to have come from that article that we mentioned before. Moving on down, we have more information. And at this point, when we end the sentence there, it is assumed that that information came from the source Alvarez, how, in quote marks. Now, the reason we had to do that is because you notice down here in the works cited page, we have two articles that actually begin with the author, Julia Alvarez, and actually the two sources uses the word how. This one is an article that Julia wrote about herself, beginning with the word how, but it's in quote marks. This is the actual title of her book, and you'll notice that that particular title is in italics. It's the name of the book. So when we go back up here, we notice that we're referring to the how, that's the article, because it's in quote marks, and that's how we differentiate the two. Moving further down, we actually have a great example here because we have the two Alvarez's. Again, the article, how, in quote marks, but this is the how coming from the book down here in the works cited page. We also, of course, have a page number. There's a space. We use no P, no period, simply the page number where this paraphrased information is coming from out of the book. Notice there's no quotes, but because we're paraphrasing, putting the words of the book in our own words, we need to, of course, cite that. Moving further down the paper, we have a quote mark, a quote. We only need to put the page 229. It is assumed that it's coming from the book. We don't need to repeat that information. We simply need to put the page number. We end with some conclusions here that the author has drawn. So that's opinion. We don't have to cite opinion, of course. That is the author's own opinion, the author of the paper. We now start the next paragraph with some information that comes from this source. This one is fairly lengthy. It has 3 words. That's because there were 3 authors, and we must name all of them in the in-text citation. So going to the Works Cited page, we actually find this source here in alphabetical order. Notice that the first name is inverted with the last name, comma, the first name, but then we follow with other names that are in first name, last name order. Noodle Tools will do this automatically for you if you put all of those authors in. It'll take care of that formatting for you. And of course, this is a print source, so we are going to need a page number. And indeed, there is page 150 noted here. Moving on down, the author of the paper starts referring to the book again. There is a quote, and because the author has already referred to the name of the book, and it's clear that it's the book, we only need the page number. However, as we move down, the author has now switched back to information from the article that's Alvarez and starting with the word how, with the one in quote marks. We have more information that ends with Tabar. So it is assumed that all of this information here came from Tabar. That's what the reader's going to assume. If there was an intervening source, we would need to have included that up here. So the reader will assume again all of this came from Tabar. Moving down, we have a lot of information here that appears to have come just from the source Julia, from here to here, all from Julia. If we go to the Works Cited, we notice again that is the first word of this particular citation. Because it's in quote marks, we again include that up there because there's no page number. It's from a source that has no page numbers. We simply just put the first word. Moving further down, we see page 167. That would refer to the novel because we see here in this sentence the author has said in her novel, because we know we're dealing with the only novel in this paper is How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent. We would assume that page 167 is in that book. We move down to Tabar again. All of this information came from Tabar. We switch back to the novel here, and in fact, the author of this paper actually talks about the chapter that's in the book, and because this information that the author of the article of the paper is paraphrasing covered several pages in the book, we put a dash and include all the pages that's being paraphrased here. She ends with a quote from page 223 of the novel. Moving on down, we now have information from an article that starts with the word about. If I go to my Works Cited page, I see up here, again, there is the word about as the first word. It's in quote marks, so that's how we include it inside our paper. If you had put about me, since it's such a short title, that would have been fine. We just don't want to have extremely long titles in quote marks. It kind of messes up the paper a little bit, starts to make it look very messy. So again, about or about me for this would have been sufficient. After every quote, you must have a citation. And of course, after everything that's paraphrased, you must have a citation. Notice we're going back and forth between Tabar, Julia. Down here, we switch back to the book. The author of the paper has chosen to go ahead and put the entire citation for the book here so that it's clear to the reader that we're now back into the novel itself. We have now switched over to that article again that Julia had written about her life. The ending here with a quote, so we put that in. and it is assumed all of this information came from this article. We have a quote from Miller. And moving down, we are going again from the article to the book. So you notice this back and forth, and that we are including weaving several different sources, Miller, book, back and forth throughout the paper. And that's basically how it makes your paper more in depth. We notice here just a page number. That would assume that it's coming from the book, since we've referred to the book up here in a prior sentence. This, of course, is paraphrasing from the book, page 183, and some conclusions from the author of the article, of the paper. And finally, at the very end is a concluding paragraph. The title of the book is referred to again. Of course, the opinion of the author of the paper is given here, and her conclusions. So that's it. If we take a quick look at the Works Cited page, you'll notice everything is in alphabetical order. If you use Noodle Tools and hit the Print Export button, it will automatically put everything in order for you and get the spacing correct. So